Good morning, everyone. This is immigration attorney Ismail Shahtakhtinski on the way to the Arlington Immigration Court. I'll give you an update about the appearances in immigration court, whether it's going to be a remote or in person, whether you should insist that your attorney and you appear in person in front of the judge or not, what are the benefits, pros and cons. And I will also, as a bonus, throw in some update about the asylum offices, the way they prefer the attorney appearances, whether it's going to be in person or not, or how does it take place. Since the pandemic, a lot of these procedures have changed, and a lot of these procedures, even after the pandemic, will probably remain changed and evolve into a hybrid of in-person versus online appearances in the immigration courts and asylum offices. So I'm currently on my way to Arlington Immigration Court on an individual hearing with a judge that prefers in-person appearance of all parties, meaning we could choose to be remote in this case, to connect through WebEx online, or we could choose to go there in person. And it was my advice to my client that we should go there in person, appear in person, and similarly with the expert to appear in person for this hearing because the judge prefers. Now, the prefers doesn't mean that we have to. It's a choice that we made to do this in person in this case. It's been a while. Most of the judges since the pandemic have preferred remote appearances via WebEx. And one of the questions come up often is my clients ask me, well, should we appear in person even if the judge uh, prefers remote hearing where we can connect via WebEx and appear online? And I always tell them no. Again, it's preference one way or another, but they accept both ways. But our goal is to make sure that the judge feels most comfortable. Not that the judge will necessarily make a decision against your case if you do it one way or another, but just, don't go against the will of the judge, whether they want you to appear in person or remotely. A lot of times, I would say probably all of the judges appear remote. The only reason why some judges prefer in-person appearance versus remote is because they don't feel comfortable using the technology, or they don't like the technology. Not to stereotype, but a lot of those judges are older judges that prefer in-person interaction versus remote, or just don't like the technology, don't trust the technology, or had troubles with technology, which I don't blame them for. But the key important thing is to understand is that you don't want to go over the judge's preference and appear in person just because you think that you're going to make a better impression about your case if you appear in person in court. Don't do it. Just follow. Talk. Your attorney should contact the clerk of the judge. Talk to the clerk and find out if this judge prefers in person or not. We, through American Immigration Lawyers Association, have an exchange, a listserv through which we exchange information, and we have the spreadsheet that some of our members thankfully prepared, and we constantly update it and share, which indicates each specific judge's preference. So if you have a lawyer, your lawyer should probably have this spreadsheet and know this, or they can call the clerk of the judge and find out if they like preference. But do follow the preference of the judge. Do not think that if you appear in person, you're going to impress or you're going to win your case, more chances that you'll win your case. No. Follow your lawyer's instruction and the judge's instructions if you want to do it. Now, as to asylum offices. So here's what's going on with asylum offices. Asylum offices initially, during the pandemic, started doing full remote. But the way they were doing remote was, kind of semi-remote. You and your lawyer would have to show up in asylum office, where you would be placed in one room with an iPad provided by the government, and the lawyer would be in another room provided with the iPad provided by the government, and then the DHS attorney would be in the other room. So there would be 3 rooms occupied for one interview. The iPads would sometimes malfunction. Either the voice or video wouldn't show up. It was burdensome, taking so much space and taking, what was the point of driving there and doing all this? Then, in the recent times, the asylum offices opened in-person interviews where you and your lawyer can appear in person. Now, all of the translators, interpreters have been on the phone, so the asylum office would contact on the phone to find a translator, and they would translate the case. But now they allow both parties, your lawyer and the applicant, to appear in person. And the question comes up, should the lawyer, and allow the lawyer to appear remotely. So asylum offices have this program where your lawyer can show up remotely at your asylum interview via telephone, where the asylum officer calls, or they also have the online video connection version for the attorney to appear via video conference. So, and this is what most of asylum officers prefer. Similarly, meaning remote versus in person. Similarly, generally in the USCIS offices, you have interviews, marriage-based case interviews, citizenship interview. And a lot of times my clients ask me, "Oh, are you going to appear in person?" And I tell them, no, they allow telephonic appearance. First of all, it's going to cost you less because I don't have to drive to that immigration office, take more time, and that's going to cost you more. Secondly, the officers prefer attorneys appear telephonically or remotely. And the reason being is that they don't want to feel the pressure. They don't want, a bunch of individuals crammed up in one room. And, they don't want, and some of the officers feel intimidated with the lawyer in the office, standing there and watching. Some could say that the purpose of having an attorney there is to intimidate the officer so that the officer doesn't do anything or ask anything that they shouldn't do, or do anything improper, which, may be true. I had a client who recently in Baltimore office was inappropriately questioned by the officer before officer even contacted me. And I'm planning to launch a complaint against that officer in in Baltimore USCIS office. But that happens rarely. Most of the officers, when I talk to them, I always like to survey the officers. I always ask them, do you prefer the way we're filing these documents? Do you prefer the way we organize? Now, during this pandemic, I've been asking them, officers, whether it's asylum officer or USCIS officer or immigration judge, after the hearings, I always survey them and say, okay, do you prefer in person? Do you think this was better, or this is, for future, so that I know? And most of the officers, pretty much, actually, I would say all of the officers that I've questioned, they said, they first say that no, they don't mind either way, which they're supposed to. They're not supposed to choose one way or another. But when I insist for them to make the decision, all of the immigration officers tell me that they prefer telephonic because, obviously, with the pandemic is not over. They don't want to have a bunch of people in one small room. And also, another factor, which they don't tell me, but I feel that, they don't want to be intimidated by having the lawyer physically present at their office. So, anyway, bottom line, for appearances, immigration courts, asylum interviews, USCIS interviews, if you or your lawyer can appear remotely, attend the interview or hearing remotely, then do choose that option, except in situations where you or your lawyer find out that this specific immigration judge prefers in-person hearings versus remote hearings, like we did in this case. And depending on the location of the court, here I can afford to drive there. It's Arlington Immigration Court, very close by. So in this case, in-person hearing is preferred. But again, just to remember, we could also do this remotely, even if the judge preferred in person. Yay, asylum granted. Just got out of the Arlington Immigration Court. In the previous video, I talked about going to the immigration court for this fascinating hearing. Took about 3 hours of hearing to listen to the story, to the direct examination of the applicant about the reasons for his asylum claim. The case involved investigative journalist who was targeted by the government officials. And at the end of the testimony, the judge said that she is inclined to granting asylum, but she would need to take some time to verify the identities of the individuals. Basically, the government officials that were claimed that still pose threat to this applicant. The applicant has been in the United States for almost 8 years now, and the country conditions may have changed. So the judge said that she will have to reserve time to review those country reports that were submitted, which a lot of times immigration judges are not able to review beforehand because of the time limitations imposed on them. So the judge wanted to reserve the decision. But what I mentioned to the court was that this individual suffered so much persecution in the past, so much harm, that he deserves at least humanitarian asylum. What humanitarian asylum is a shortcut to asylum for someone who may have suffered severe harm in the past. But the country conditions may have changed and things may have improved in that country. But despite the fact that it may be safe now for the respondent to return to his or her home country, for humanitarian reasons, because of the harm that they suffered, the U.S. government should discretionarily approve asylum. And that's what we did. The judge agreed, and the DHS agreed not to appeal, not to reserve appeal the decision of the judge, and the asylum granted. So happy result. We're really extremely happy. The client is happy. This was a tough case in some ways because the government was opposing the asylum grant, and it took about 3 hours, and it was very fascinating. The judge was listening carefully, reviewing all of the reports and evidence we provided. It was a really interesting case. So thank you for listening, and best of luck and good days. And please hit like and subscribe to our channel.